Go to school, get your high school diploma. No, I'm done.
This is what we were talking about. Where are you heading, man?
I'm not gonna beat him up.
I see what I've been through. How many other people have been through this?
I never really had a childhood. Like, other kids thought the world was all happy. I tell them, like, no, the world is actually a dark place.
Joey, I can't fix the home life. I can't fix that. Good morning, good morning. How are you guys? Are you awake yet? These kids have been hurt. So many of them are broken. They are all the outcasts.
If Black Rock didn't exist, 82 kids last year wouldn't have got a diploma.
If I got one of the sexual assault counselors to come over here, would you be willing to talk?
What do you want out of life?
I don't want to graduate from high school.
Why are you still at home? No, you gotta come to school, honey. Do you need me to come get you?
Love, 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 love. Mwah.
We can't control the events that happen to us, but we can choose not to be reduced by them.
I'm just gonna be strong.
I've been sitting around, watching this world go round and round, spinning my head till I hit the ground. Take a deep breath, let's leave this town, leave this town.
And I'm just lost. I feel like I'm drowning in my flaws. I've seen things that I never thought I'd see, and I've been a person that I never thought I'd be, and I've been defeated, brought to my knees. Thought about things that you wouldn't believe, man.
Black Rock High School, if you would please join me in congratulating graduate number 20, Caleb Jeffrey.
Let's leave this town.
One more hand for the crew, guys. Here we go. The Bad Kids.
Thank you.
That's a great trailer, guys. Great trailer. Because I feel like, you know, obviously this is a serious topic, and it'd be very easy to make a very grave trailer that just gets everyone really sad. But there's a lot of uplifting elements to this story, and so you have a trailer that showcases that. Was that important to you guys as filmmakers?
Yeah, it was important in the film, too. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's rough. There were days when we would say, like, okay, it's too emotional. We have to pack it up. But then there are other days, especially those days when a kid graduates and walks down the hall, where you just kind of swell, your heart swells a little bit, and you just are part of that. And we wanted to capture both of those qualities.
Yeah. Same for you, Keith.
Well, you know, a trailer, you don't want to depress people too much. They won't go see the movie, right? So.
And Vonda, it feels kind of wrong to call you Vonda. I feel like I should be calling you Principal because you're so authoritarian in the film.
Miss V.
Miss V.
Miss V. Okay, great. There we go. How does it feel to have a trailer with your kids in there and to see a film eventually come out about these people that you get to spend a daily basis on?
Obviously, it's surreal. But for me, it's very inspirational because I want to share our students' possibilities and potential with everyone. And so it's really nice to be able to show that we have a group of students out there that are really an untapped resource for our nation. And if we put some love and time into them, they can reach great and accomplish great things.
So guys, I want to get to you first about how you first heard about Black Rock High School. When did you first come upon it, and when did you know that you wanted to make a documentary about it?
Am I taking this one? All right. Keith and I had been making a bunch of short documentaries about public education for a Gates Foundation startup. And we were really moved by how dedicated public school teachers are. We chose to focus in schools that had been labeled failing schools, especially because we felt that that label was an unfair judgment based on the expectation that teachers can magically solve problems that are much bigger than just public education. And we discovered Black Rock High School on one of our scouts. A woman out in the district where Black Rock is said, I need to show you this school. It's not like anything you're asking me to show you, but it's kind of our hidden gem, and we're really proud of it.
And we also knew that this was the place that had the reputation where the bad kids go, you know. But when we stepped into the place, it was such a warm, really familial environment, kids lining the hallway, playing guitar, lots of hugs, lots of teachers putting a hand on someone's shoulder. It was just kind of a magical environment. And we really wanted to make a full feature-length film there. Yeah. We did.
And Ms. V, I mean, what did you feel like when you were first approached about the matter?
I wasn't very happy. I wasn't very excited about it. In fact, I called the superintendent and said, you know, I have great concerns. I don't want anyone exploiting my kids. I don't want anyone to diminish them as individuals and what they go through. And the gentleman convinced the superintendent to come for a couple weeks, and during that 2-week period, I got to know them and realized their big hearts and that wasn't their intention. And so it evolved over time after that.
And how did the students respond to the notion of a film crew coming into the school?
Well, the first couple of days, of course, they're going to be teenagers and they're going to act up in front of the cameras and, you know, look at me. But
There's a lot of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Shout outs to their friends and family, I'm sure.
Right, but after a couple of days, and after they talked with Lou and Keith spent 2 weeks in the school without cameras first. And so the students got to know them a little bit before the cameras came out. And then pretty soon, we really forgot the camera was there. They were there for over 2 years. So you just go about living your life after a while.
There was also a thing I remember overhearing one kid say to another kid, dude, don't make those faces at the camera because the second you look at the camera, you end up on the editing room floor. Wow. So they were media savvy and they knew that if they wanted to be in a movie, they had to kind of act like we weren't there.
That's great. I mean, you guys come upon some great cases, some great kids, you know, Joey, Lee, Jennifer, the sort of the main subjects of the film. Did you initially know who you wanted to sort of profile, or was it sort of a learning experience as once you were inside the school?
No, we had no idea initially who we wanted to profile, though Miss V made some recommendations, and Joey was one of those recommendations. But you know, we were looking for kids whose experiences had a range to them. We didn't want like 3 different kids who were raising children, or 3 different kids who were struggling with drug problems. So I mean, to us it was important to represent a range of experience. And we interviewed probably 60 kids at the school. We would pre-interview, just sit down with them without cameras, no audio tape, nothing. Then we would do formal sit-down interviews with them, just with audio, just to get to know them better and to find out how much they would be willing to reveal about themselves. What was funny about the kids, you know, when you make a documentary, you always think, oh, people aren't going to open up. It's going to take months and months for them to open up. Not with these kids, yeah. In fact, she laughed at us a few times when we would say, we're not sure if we can make a documentary here. And she's like, the kids will open up to you.
Well, and all of our kids have a story. They're there because they have a story. And it means a lot to them to be heard. And these guys gave them a venue for their stories.
And obviously, it sounds like you guys were getting a lot of footage. So, I mean, how long were you at the school? How much footage did you collect? And was it hard to sort of narrow down between the main subjects of the film? Was that a process?
Well, we were at the school for about 2 school years, and we ended up with like 220 hours of footage. And initially, when people would ask us what we were doing, we said, oh, we're making an 8-hour film. But it narrowed down. And, you know, one of the things that was important to us is that even though there are 3 main characters, there are a lot of secondary characters. We very much wanted a mosaic. In early cuts of the film, people would say, like, oh, just put the names on of the kids that we're supposed to care about, which to us was like anathema. Like, no, you're supposed to care about all of them. In fact, you're supposed to care about all the kids out there who aren't in the film who are living the same story that these kids are living. So we had to find an interesting balance of having main characters that you followed, but always being reminded that for every kid whose story you know, there's a whole population of kids out there who you would love in the same way that you love the ones that you find out about.
And, you know, Ms. V, were you pretty into the process as far as the editing, how that was going down? Did you get to see it cut, or did you see it first on the premiere night in Sundance, right? You guys premiered in Sundance. That was incredible.
No, we had kind of an agreement initially that at the end I would get to see it, and if there was anything that caused me anxiety for the kids, that we would have a discussion about what would happen with that. And so I originally came out to their home and saw it in August. Before Sundance. And so I saw it in August, and then they did another version of it, and I saw it again in October before it went to Sundance.
And how did you, as a principal, how are you reacting to this? Obviously, these kids you know pretty well.
I was pleased from the get-go. In fact, there were a couple of scenes that they were sure I was going to have anxiety about, and I didn't. the biggest one where I say to Joey, I know a lot of stuff that you're going to do here isn't going to apply to your future. And they were worried that as an educator that I was, that was going to be bad for me. And I was like, no, that's the reality. And if we don't tell the kids the truth, then we lose their respect. And so for me to sit with somebody who is facing drug addiction and say, oh, geometry is going to matter to you, I'm going to lose his respect. And so that was one of the scenes where we had some discussion afterwards.
I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary school that you work at. I mean, what brought you there, and what connects you with these kids? I didn't always do a good job in school. I didn't want to conform to society's expectations, and not in the way that these guys did, but more in the way of voicing my opinion against the system. And so that often caused me trouble. So I had that background. But I was originally the principal at the traditional high school, and I never got to have any contact with the students. And I was miserable. And I was doing paperwork and meetings. And so I went to the superintendent and I asked to go into the classroom. And many people, were appalled by that because they thought I was going back to the classroom. And I said, no, I'm going forward into kids' lives. And so after I was in the classroom for a year, the continuation school principal sought me out for their program, saying that he was sure I was a good fit for these students. That's amazing. I mean, obviously I don't want to embarrass Ms. V, but obviously she plays a pretty central character in the film as well,
Hero.
right?
Hero.
I mean, she's obviously a pretty incredible person. I mean, how did you guys intersperse her story along with the students? And obviously she's doing amazing things like, getting up at 6 and calling the kids, making sure they're coming to school. I mean, these are pretty important details.
This is actually something we struggled with in the editing of this film to some degree, because people would always react when they would see material from the film that Miss V is a superhero of some sort. And to us, it's a problematic reaction, because we don't want people to think, well, you have to be a superhero to help kids in need. So we actually very specifically withheld much information from the audience in the movie about your background, right? People are always asking after the movie, well, I want to know more about her. Well, for us it was important that you didn't penetrate all this stuff about Miss V, because we wanted her to feel somehow familiar, normal.
Well, and I'm not unique. I'm not. There are a lot of educators out there who love these kids just as much as I do. And so I don't think it's fair to say, oh, Ms. V is up on a pedestal when I'm just doing my job. And that's what the level of the expectation of what our job should be. And if somebody isn't living up to that level, then that should be the exception.
Another thing that I'm really interested in is the balance between the home life and the interactions in school. Was that a hard thing to sort of narrow down, and how the home life sort of affects these students and their progress?
Well, I think, one of the things a lot of the kids would say to us is, oh, at the regular high school, we were told, you don't discuss your home life here. This is school. We talk about school here. And the difference at Black Rock High School that we observed that we thought was so powerful was the idea that you can't expect a kid to be able to learn if they're hungry or worried about where they're going to sleep or worried about an abuser who's in their home environment. So the home life is something that has to be addressed, and I think the way it's addressed at Black Rock High School and not ignored is looking at these kids not just as widgets going through the education system, but as individual people who are broader than just how well are they learning their geometry or can they write a topic paragraph. And we tried to capture some of that in the film. It was a little hard to get into people's homes sometimes. Parents were a little uncomfortable. Sometimes we would go to people's homes, and it's kind of awkward as a film crew to say, hi, we're here in your living room, and we're just gonna hang out. Yeah, just be yourselves. But it was important for us to show these kids beyond the walls of the school as well.
Yeah, I mean, you show a little clip in the trailer, but also in the beginning scene with the truancy officer coming to Joey's house. Obviously, that's a very important scene in the film because it sort of lays out his struggles and how the school, Black Rock High School, is helping him. Was that a difficult scene to get in there?
That was a very difficult scene, actually, to film because you have to help me remember exactly how it worked, but we got information that the probation officer was going to be visiting Joey's house. And we thought about how enormously awkward it would be for us to show up with the probation officer, right? So I actually went out ahead of Lou and the probation officer to talk to Joey and his mother about what was about to happen. So I mean, that's an indication of, you know, sometimes documentaries, you do a little finagling to get something to feel real. It was real, the visit was real, but I would never have gone in there just as a surprise.
Well, and that was another example of why I felt comfortable opening up our school to Lou and Keith, because they didn't want Joey to be blindsided by the probation officer and them with the camera. So they cared enough about him as an individual to give him a heads up that that was going to come about.
And I'm sure there's a lot of kids that are struggling with these same, you know, issues that Joey is. I mean, is this something that you hope can be shared amongst administrations and other schools? Are you going to show it at Black Rock, actually?
Well, several questions there. We do really want to show this to the continuation schools and the alternative schools out there. Lou and Keith have been working hard to put together a program to bring into the schools with the film, so that they can have the discussion on the different types of students who come across our doorstep and how we can best address their needs. So they want to give copies of the film to all the continuation schools along with the curricular program. And I'm sorry, you had one other question.
No, and we also we just showed the film at Black Rock High School recently.
Right.
Because we're testing this discussion guide that we want to accompany the film to these other continuation schools. So we showed the film to the current student body at Black Rock just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
And have you, I mean, obviously it started to show for audiences, have any other sort of educators and students come up to you, I'm sure related to some of the storylines that are in the film?
We've shown the film in a couple of festivals where we've had screenings for high school students, and one of the most exciting things is, like, we were at one festival and they showed it to 1,200 high school students, and it was amazing that 1,200 high school students stayed off of their cell phones for 2 hours. But then afterwards, a bunch of kids came up to us and they said, "Hey, we're the bad kids at our school." And to see how young people are responding to the film is a really exciting part of the process.
Also, last week at a screening in LA, I had a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old come up to me afterward and say, on the way to the screening tonight, we were hitting our parents up for Christmas presents and, you know, what cell phone we wanted and what new computer program we wanted. And we realized in watching this film that there's so many bigger problems out there, and that we really need to contribute to society rather than just take. And it was really eye-opening for them.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a little bit, Lou, the title, The Bad Kids. Obviously, that's more of an inflection of what society thinks about these kids, that sort of thing. Not you labeling them as that. How did the discussion for the title come about between you and Keith, and how did that come up?
A lot of people didn't like the title. In fact, we were told by, we had this film at the Sundance Documentary Film Lab, and some of our most respected advisors there kept saying, well, you can't call it that. You know, it's mainly because you don't want to use an ironic title for a film. We hadn't really intended it as ironic, though we intended it in the way that you're describing it. This is the reputation of these kids. This is how we all know these kids from the other side of the tracks. And, you know, in fact, it's exciting with the story Lou was telling about the kids coming up after the screening and saying, hey, we're the bad kids. And we're helping them reappropriate this term, you know? They think it's cool. So I'm glad we stuck with the title, but many, many people told us, don't call it that.
I love the title.
Yes,
I mean,
I know you do.
you know, in our community, it's kind of the joke, because it's always, oh, well, that's where the bad kids go. And I sit there with my smile on my face saying, send them my way, you know, because they're not at all the bad kids. They're the kids who have taught me a lot. Every day I learn from them. In fact, the lady who brought Lou and Keith to our school and I recently wrote a book called The Lessons from the Bad Kids. And over 30 years, I've learned so much from these kids, much more than I've ever been able to give them.
Yeah.
Lou and I also just started the Bad Kids Scholarship Fund. So later this year, you're going to get to actually bestow the Bad Kids Scholarship Fund on some students. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's really incredible. And Lou, I mean, you're an educator as well, and so did it affect the way that you teach?
I've been stealing tips from Miss Viland ever since we started filming her. So she would often, because I had a teaching job in LA, and then we would drive out to the school and teach, and she would ask me how things were going with my students, and I'd complain, and she'd say, oh, you just need to do this. And it was usually like a much more compassionate way of looking at students, which sometimes I didn't think my college kids deserved, but I would listen to Miss V and take the tips from her.
And how are things continuing at the school? Obviously, we don't want any spoilers for the documentary. Audiences are going to be watching this, but how is everybody doing in sort of in a generality, I guess?
In general, the students have been doing very, very well. And as far as the impact on the school, we've had scholarships given for our students. One of the biggest, most touching things for me is many of our kids don't have shoes. And they have, their holes in their shoes. And so we have a GoFundMe account and for the basic necessities of these kids. So we've been able to buy kids some shoes, toothbrushes, deodorant, all the things that these kids need. We also were able to take a group of our students on Outward Bound, which our students would have never had that opportunity. And we've been able to bring some of the students who had never been down the hill into society, down the hill on field trips to broaden their horizons.
That's great. Well, that's incredible. I'd be a little remiss not to mention Lost in La Mancha, which is, you guys also worked on that documentary about Terry Gilliam's film, which is actually happening now. How has that saga been up to now, and how is that process of documenting sort of the failure of something and then have it come back around, right?
Well, we keep bugging Terry that we'd like to make the sequel, so as soon as he gets the green light, we want to be dogging him with cameras again. And I think it's still a bumpy road for him to get the film off the ground. But as an artist, I think it's important that there are artists out there who keep struggling to achieve their vision in the face of harsh reality.
And what's the difficulty level between Terry Gilliam and the Black Rock High School? is a completely different world, I'm sure, as a documentary filmmaker.
In terms of which is more difficult to document?
Right, exactly.
I would say the Terry Gilliam world's a bit more difficult to document. Yeah, it's difficult to be on a film set, especially a film set where everything is going horribly wrong, as it did on Lost in La Mancha. But yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I guess we have some questions out there in the audience. Right there.
Hi. I'm thrilled by what you've done. I'm really moved. And I taught once in a school, not as bad as that, but in the area. And the problem seemed to be the parents. And I know you've touched on that. For instance, have the parents have you shown them the movie? I mean, they don't make the children, but the children are the product of the parents.
We honestly don't have that much parent involvement at our school. It's very difficult for me to get parents to even come to, we're supposed to have a site-based management meeting that has equal amounts of parents, students, and teachers on it. And I do everything I can to get parents involved, and it's very difficult. So we say, okay, we're going to work without you, because we have to work with what we have. And so we feel that we'll give them the skills that they need to move forward with their lives in spite of their current living situation.
I also think it's very easy to judge the parents. Yes. And I would certainly feel that on certain occasions, like Joey's mother is in the film, and sometimes I'd be very angry at her. But I also know that Joey's mother grew up in the same circumstances that he grew up in, and she didn't have the opportunity to benefit from a school like Black Rock High School. And so rather than focusing on the negative and judging people, I just wanted to make sure that we show a path forward that is a more constructive path.
Well, and it's the same concept that we use with the kids. Everyone does the best that they can in the current situation. So many of our parents just didn't have the skills themselves. I mean, they're doing the best that they can.
Great answers. Next question, right there.
Hi. Thank you for being here. My question is for Ms. V. Your job seems like something that probably comes along with a lot of unpredictable moments. What are some lessons you've taken away from the students that you've dealt with?
Well, as I mentioned, actually, we just wrote a book on all the lessons. There are so many, but the biggest and foremost is their resiliency. I mean, these kids, man, life keeps handing them difficult situation after difficult situation, and they keep bouncing back and saying, you know, I can do this, I'm going to move forward. And they really have a great belief in the future. And if we, old people, could attach to that feeling of resiliency and belief in the future, man, it's very inspirational.
I would also add, you know, just as an observer, the thing that struck me the most about the school and the kids there, and it was quite beautiful, is they're incredibly compassionate people. And because they've been through so many painful experiences themselves, they're very sensitive to it in other people. And there's like an empathy, untapped empathy resource among these young people if we give them the structure and the foundation where they can, you know, do careers. I mean, so many of them want to be in the medical fields, or they want to be nurses, or they want to be emergency medical technicians. And I think if I were in an emergency situation, I would want a kid from Black Rock High School holding my hand, much more so than the college kids I teach. So.
One last question right there.
Hi, I just wanted to know, were there any stories in particular that resonated with each of you, and who were they, and what stories were they?
Stories in particular that, sorry.
Storylines, I think, in the film.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Who has stuck with you the most? Who has stuck with you?
Oh, sorry. I would say the main storyline, which is the character Joey, who you see in the trailer. I mean, we actually got very personally involved in Joey's life because it was very difficult to watch him succumb to meth addiction and just watch all the really difficult things he was going through. And when we stopped filming at Black Rock, we had a conversation with him about, you know, if he ever wanted to change things up and, you know, change his life, he should get in touch with us. And he did, and he came and he actually lived with us in LA for a month. We helped get him into rehab. I mean, I think his story will always stick with me because there's a lot about him that I relate to.
And for me, you know, there's a scene in the trailer and a scene in the film where a young woman is crying about the fact that she's going to graduate and that she's terrified about this. And that was the moment when I realized, oh, these kids don't have the same experience that I had. When I was in high school, I couldn't wait to get the hell out of there. And the fact that the world terrifies them tells me how fragile and vulnerable they are. And we don't think about bad kids as being fragile and vulnerable. We think about them as being really tough. So that moment really made me question all of my assumptions about any young person that I meet.
That's great. Well, all the storylines are very inspiring, and it starts in LA on the 16th and here in New York on the 23rd. So one more hand for the crew here, guys. The bad kids, look out for the film, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.